Welcome to True Crime Murders Sweden, where we dive into chilling true crime cases from Sweden. If you love mystery and real-life crime stories, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more cases.
Imagine this. Okay, it's April 10th, 2024. Pretty normal evening. Everything's kind of winding down. And suddenly this call comes in.
Oh, wow.
It's a 12-year-old boy calling emergency services. And he's saying his father, his dad, has just been shot right there in a pedestrian underpass in Skärholmen.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him to see something so violent happen to his own father.
Exactly. It's just, well, you think about the terror in his voice, having to report something so brutal, witnessing that kind of violence.
It's just a devastating situation all around. Losing a loved one is always incredibly painful, but for a child to be there, to actually see it happen, it just adds another layer of tragedy to it all. Just unimaginable.
It really is. And that's what we're diving into today, the murder of 39-year-old Mikael in Skärholmen. We're going to look at everything we know about what happened, from the moments leading up to the shooting to what's happening now. An 18-year-old has been charged with the murder, and 4 others are facing charges for their alleged involvement. Their trial is set for January.
It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
It will. But even beyond the legal side of things, what really strikes you is the sheer human impact. Someone close to Mikael said that even knowing he's gone, it just doesn't feel real. The memories, they said, are so vivid now, almost amplified.
That's really common when you're grieving, that feeling of disbelief. Like your mind knows what happened, but your heart hasn't caught up yet. And those really strong memories, that's your mind holding on to what it's lost, replaying those moments over and over.
Makes sense. So we've got all this information from various reports and interviews. What we're trying to do today is really get into the details, put all the pieces together, and understand what happened. There's some big questions that still linger. What exactly happened in that underpass? Why was Mikael targeted?
Yeah, those are the questions that everyone wants answers to.
Okay, so to start, let's just set the scene. Paint a picture of where this all took place.
Okay, so we're in Skärholmen, right, which is a suburb of Stockholm. And the actual crime scene is a pedestrian tunnel, a very ordinary, everyday kind of place.
And it was so close to home for Mikael, like practically in his backyard. He was just heading to the local swimming hall with his 12-year-old son when it happened. Just a regular father-son outing,
Right, just a normal day that turned into a nightmare. It really makes you think about how fragile life can be. And then you have the accused, Jamal, who was 17 at the time. What's immediately noticeable is his suspected connection to this gang conflict that's been going on between Skärholmen and Vorburg.
It's a pretty serious one from what we've heard.
It is very serious, and this conflict seems to be a major part of the story here.
And it gets even more complicated when you consider Jamal's history. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. He had reportedly run away from a youth care home, an HVBM, and he was already a suspect in an attempted murder in Vorburg, which involved a stabbing. And then, to add to it all, the tunnel where this happened was very close to where Jamal lived.
Whoa. You start to see all these pieces connecting in a really disturbing way. I mean, how was someone with that kind of history able to just disappear from a care home and then end up involved in something like this? It raises some serious questions about the system and whether it's doing enough to protect people.
For sure. The public response to all of this was huge. I mean, it's understandable. The whole country was shocked. The police actually thanked the public for all the help they got with the investigation. It just shows you how much people cared about getting justice for Mikael.
It also shows how much people value their community, their sense of safety.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go back to that day. What do we actually know about what went down in the tunnel?
Okay, so from what we've been able to gather, Mikael and his son were walking through the tunnel. Then they passed these 3 young men. For some reason, and we don't know exactly why, Mikael turned around and went back to talk to them.
It's almost like he felt he had to say something. Maybe he saw something, heard something, we just don't know.
Maybe. And it's so frustrating because we don't have Mikael's side of the story. Of those 3, we only have one who's admitted to being there. The other 2 say they weren't even in the tunnel that day.
Which is hard to believe, considering. But, okay, so what does the one who admits to being there have to say?
Well, not a whole lot, actually. They basically just said that, yeah, they were there. They remember someone saying something as Mikael and his son walked by, and then Mikael turning around and there being some kind of conversation. But they were very vague on the details.
Right, so we're still missing those crucial details about what was actually said, what led up to the shooting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's those missing pieces that make it really difficult to fully understand what happened.
According to the prosecutor, the whole thing escalated very quickly. Jamal supposedly pulls out a gun and fires a shot. Doesn't actually hit Michael, but then Michael moves towards him and Jamal shoots him twice.
Twice, in the torso. One shot hit him in the chest and the other in the abdomen. It was the chest wound that killed him.
It's just awful.
It is, just senseless.
So those three young men, they take off running. Jamal escapes on an electric bicycle, sometimes called a row bike, which is kind of like a road bike. You know what's really amazing? Michael's son. He called 112 right away, and he was able to give the police a description of what happened. Even told them there were 3 young guys involved. Pretty incredible for a 12-year-old in that situation.
It really is. I mean, to be able to think clearly and act so quickly in a situation like that under so much pressure, it's remarkable.
Yeah. And remember how witnesses mentioned seeing an electric bicycle or road bike and maybe an electric scooter? His description actually backed that up. Really crucial for the investigation.
It definitely was. His testimony helped to corroborate what other witnesses were saying, giving the police a much clearer picture of what happened.
Speaking of the others who were there, one of them is actually facing charges for aggravated protection of a criminal. He did give the police some information, although he claims he was shocked by what happened and didn't even notice Michael's son.
So even though he's trying to downplay his involvement, his account does line up with the basic timeline of events. It's interesting how these dynamics work within criminal groups.
Yeah.
You've got loyalty on the one hand, but also self-preservation. And in this case, it seems like self-preservation might be winning out. You know, the prosecutor mentioned that his cooperation could actually affect his sentencing.
Shows you how much value they place on that inside information.
Absolutely. It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
So after the shooting, Jamal, he gets out of there fast. He ends up all the way in Eskilstuna. And get this, he's found by the police there.
In Eskilstuna.
Yeah. But here's the thing. They were actually investigating a completely different case, something to do with narcotics. And just by chance, they came across Jamal, who, remember, was already wanted for that attempted murder in Voorburg. Talk about a lucky break.
Wow, what are the chances? That's wild. It just goes to show that sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest breakthroughs in a case.
Totally agree. The discovery of the murder weapon, that had a bit of luck involved too, wouldn't you say?
How so?
About 2 months after Michael was killed, a family found a gun.
Okay.
It was in a storage unit near Jamal's home. And apparently it was just sitting there, easy to reach into the unit and grab.
Seriously. That's kind of careless, isn't it? Leaving a gun like that.
Well, yeah. Either that, or they just really thought nobody would find it. But anyway, they did find it.
And I'm assuming that's when the DNA evidence came into play.
Exactly. They found Jamal's DNA on the weapon, which wasn't a surprise. But they also found DNA from someone else who was connected to the network, but not actually there at the shooting.
Interesting. So not directly involved in the murder itself, but their DNA being on the weapon still tells us something.
Right. It gives you a glimpse into how that weapon was being used, who had access to it, and how it might have circulated within that criminal group.
Right, right. Okay, so where do things stand legally?
Okay, so Jamal is facing some serious charges. Murder and aggravated firearms offense, which is a really serious type of firearms violation. He says he didn't do it, didn't murder Michael.
Okay.
But he does admit to handling the weapon, said he even test-fired it.
Ah, I see. That's a common strategy, admitting to some things but denying the main charge. It's a way to try and explain away certain evidence while still maintaining innocence.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the other 4 individuals, they're facing charges of aggravated protection of a criminal and aiding in such protection. They're all denying those charges.
Okay, so it sounds like things are going to get pretty complicated in court.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. To really understand the gravity of this situation, we have to go back to Jamal's background. There's a lot there. Reportedly, he's had behavioral issues since he was really young, like 7 years old, aggression, low mood. He was diagnosed with ADHD, had sleep problems, all those things. His childhood involved being moved around a lot, going from one care placement to another.
It sounds like a really tough start to life, and it just makes you wonder if there were missed opportunities to intervene, to provide him with the support he needed. Maybe things could have turned out differently.
It's hard to say. But yeah, he was in and out of different care placements. Some reports describe him as being nice and calm, but there were also these recurring behavioral challenges. By the time he was 13, he was placed in care outside of his local area.
Being moved around like that, especially at such a young age, can be really disruptive. It can make it even harder to form stable attachments and to get the consistent support that's needed.
Sadly, his involvement in crime, it started early too. He was suspected of a lot of offenses, mostly drug-related, but he was rarely actually convicted. By the fall of 2023, he'd run away from that youth care home we mentioned and was basically on the run for months.
So this escape, it becomes a really crucial point in the story. It highlights the challenges that the system faces when trying to care for young people who are at high risk and who might not want to be there.
It's a tough situation. So police believe that Jamal was deeply involved in this conflict between the Skärholmen and Vorburg factions. This is a serious gang war that's been going on since 2022, and it's all about the drug trade, the money.
The stakes are so high in these kinds of conflicts, and it creates this incredibly dangerous environment where violence becomes the norm. They've even tried to carry out shootings in broad daylight in public areas, which shows a complete disregard for anyone's safety.
Yeah, it's terrifying. They say it's one of the reddest conflicts in the Stockholm area, meaning it's extremely violent.
Wow. Reddest, yeah, that really paints a picture of the level of violence involved. It's not just about territory or even the drug trade. It's about power, respect, reputation within these criminal circles.
And Jamal, he was allegedly right in the thick of it. He's even suspected of being involved in the kidnapping and shooting of a 17-year-old who had ties to Vorburg back in 2023. The police believe it was an attempt to force the teenager to help the Skärholmen Vorby faction.
It's a really disturbing escalation of the conflict, targeting a young person like that. It shows how far these groups are willing to go to maintain control and influence.
Absolutely. What's really concerning is what the local police chief, Suzanne Freiberg, had to say about all of this. She basically admitted that they failed to prevent Mikael's murder. Despite knowing that Jamal was wanted for the attempted murder and that he'd escaped from the care home, he was able to just roam free in Skärholmen with a weapon.
That's a really tough admission for a police chief to make. It suggests that they may not have had the resources, the legal tools, or maybe even the information they needed to effectively intervene and keep this young man off the streets.
Yeah, it highlights the complexities of dealing with at-risk youth who are connected to these criminal networks.
It really does. It makes you wonder, what more could have been done? Was there a breakdown in communication between agencies? Were there signs that were missed? It's hard to say for sure.
Freiberg did say she felt the police had used the tools they had appropriately, but she also acknowledged the difficulty of protecting people who are caught up in these criminal circles.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? Trying to protect the community while also ensuring that young people who are at risk get the help they need.
For sure. She also said that addressing the issue of at-risk youth is a top priority for them.
That's good to hear. But it's also heartbreaking because it comes too late for Mikael and his family.
And the trial's coming up soon, scheduled for mid-January next year. Jamal will be facing charges for both murders, the one in Skärholmen and the attempted murder in Vorburg.
It'll be interesting to see what the outcome is. In the meantime, though, there are real people who are trying to pick up the pieces and move forward.
It's hard to imagine how they're coping. Michael's former partner, his son's mother, she talked about the struggle of moving on after something so horrific. And their son, he's been amazing. He started a new school, made new friends, even joined a football team. And get this, he's gone back to swimming.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. That takes so much courage to face something that's so closely tied to that traumatic event. It's truly inspiring to see that kind of resilience.
It really is. And there's actually been a decrease in violent crime in Skärholmen since Michael's death.
That's good news, at least.
It is. It could be because of the ongoing investigations. Maybe the police and social services are working together more closely. Maybe more at-risk youth are being placed in different settings. It's hard to say for sure.
Right. But it does suggest that maybe some positive changes are happening as a result of all this.
Maybe so. There was a big response from politicians, too. A lot of condemnation, a lot of promises to take action.
That's often the initial reaction to something like this, but the real challenge is turning those words into meaningful action.
Right. And it seems like there are some major issues within Skärholmen's social services. A lot of managers have resigned, and social workers have been speaking out, saying that budget cuts are forcing them to make really tough choices about how to care for vulnerable children and young people.
That's a big problem. If the very systems that are supposed to help prevent these kinds of tragedies are struggling, it makes you wonder if anything will really change.
Exactly. It's all connected. And the investigation into these claims is ongoing, so we'll see what comes of that. Michael's sister, Aneta, she's been very open about her feelings about all of this. She wants closure, of course, but she's also really apprehensive about the trial. She said she doesn't want to see Jamal. She doesn't want to hear him. She's worried that it will just create another traumatic memory for her.
That's understandable. Having to face the person accused of killing your brother, it can be re-traumatizing.
And one thing that's come up a lot since Michael's death is this idea of civil courage. Many people see what he did, turning back to those young men, as an act of civil courage, a willingness to stand up for what's right.
It's a powerful concept, civil courage. It's about taking action, even when it might be difficult or dangerous, to try to make things better.
And Anita's really taken that idea to heart. She said that what happened to Michael has made her even more determined to speak out against injustice, even though she knows there might be risks.
It's inspiring to see how she's channeling her grief and anger into something positive, into a commitment to make a difference. It's like she's carrying on her brother's legacy in a way.
So as we wrap up here, let's just take a moment to reflect on everything we've covered today. We've talked about the tragic loss of Michael, the troubled past of the young man accused of killing him, the violent gang war that was raging in the background, the challenges faced by the police and social services, and the incredible resilience of Michael's family.
It's a lot to take in, and it's hard to make sense of something so senseless, so utterly devastating.
Yeah, it is. But it also forces us to confront some really important questions. What can we do to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening in the future? How do we create a society where everyone feels safe and supported, where young people who are struggling get the help they need before it's too late?
Big questions, for sure.
It all comes back to that balance between individual action and societal change. It's about fostering that sense of civil courage, like what Michael may have shown, but it's also about making sure that the systems we rely on to protect and support our communities are actually working. And that's something for all of us to think about, to talk about, and to act upon.
Well said.
Thanks for joining me today for this deep dive. It's been a heavy one, but I hope it's also been insightful. It's in these difficult conversations that we can start to find solutions to build a better future for everyone.
Absolutely.
And thank you to all of you for listening.
Yes, thank you.
Until next time,
Bye.
take care.